Okay, we are reviewing Yechida 16. The topic is Sfirat HaOmer. Follow my pointer. Svartem lachem imacharat HaShabbat. Miyom haviachem et omer hatnufa. Sheva Shabbatot tmimot tiyana. Torah says that you should count from the day after Shabbat, which is understood to be the day after the first day of Pesach. So that's the second day of Pesach. From the day that we bring the Karban, which is called the Karban HaOmer. How much do you count? 7 weeks, 7 complete weeks. Ad mimacharat haShabbat hashviit, until the end of the 7th day after the 7th week. Tisperu chamishim yom, you should count 50 days, although we Chazal understand that to mean you just count 49 and you stop at 50. V'ikravtem mincha chadash al Hashem. At the 50th day, you bring a new Karban, which happens to be called the Karban Shtei Halechem. Okay, there's another pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. In Sefer Dvarim it says, Shiva Shavuot Tispar Lach, you should count 7 weeks. Mehachel Chermei Shpakama, Tachel Lispor Shiva Shavuot. From the time that you start putting the sickle in the field, in other words, the harvest season, you should start to count 7 weeks. And then you should have Shavuot. These are the 2 psukim in the Torah that deal with the concept of Sfirat HaOmer. I asked a question over here, namely, name some differences between the 2 different descriptions. So I'll just go through some of them very quickly. Number 1, if you notice in Vayikra, it talks about counting the days, Chamishim Yom, and it talks about the weeks, Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot. In Dvarim, it just mentions the weeks and not the days. That's the one difference. Now, the second major difference is that in Vayikra, the Torah seems to put the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer in the context of Karbanot. It sounds like a Beit HaMikdash type thing. You bring the Karban, you start counting. You stop counting, you bring another Karban. Which would mean that, okay, maybe today when we have no Karbanot, that we have no Sfirat HaOmer. As opposed to, if you look at the Sefer Dvarim, it doesn't really mention Karbanot. It just talks about the season of the year. Right? You should count 7 weeks and then have a holiday called Shavuos. It doesn't talk about Karbanot at all. So the question is, what's the story? That's another distinction. Did you want to mention another one? Manny?
Starting.
What?
Starting point.
What do you mean the starting point? Oh, when do you start? Well, same thing, right? When do you start? Do you start at a certain seasonal time, or do you start after you bring a certain Karban? Is that what you meant? Okay, good. Those are some differences between the descriptions, which we'll see might become relevant as we learn the Gemara. This is a famous Gemara in Masechet Menachot, just a couple of lines, which deals with the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer. And the Gemara says, Gufa, Amar Abaye, mitzvah lemimnei yomei, mitzvah lemimnei shvuei. There's a mitzvah to count the days, and there's also a mitzvah to count the weeks. Count both, as we do, as everyone knows that we do, right? Rabbanan Devei Rav Ashi, the rabbis in the Beit Midrash of Rav Ashi, Manu Yomei Umanu Shvuei, they actually counted the days, and they counted the weeks. That's what they did, because the Torah says to do. It seems like it makes a lot of sense. But Ameimar, Mani Yomei, Velo Mani Shvuei. He counted the days, but he didn't count the weeks. And you might be wondering, why would he do that? The Torah says to count both. And in the other place, the Torah says count the weeks, not the days. So why did he count the days and not the weeks? Because he said, Amar, Zecher LaMikdashu. I want to make something clear when I do the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer. I don't want people to hear me counting Sfira, see me counting Sfira, and to think that, I don't want people to think that, that I'm actually really fulfilling the mitzvah. I'm not really fulfilling the mitzvah because there's no what? There's no Beit HaMikdash. It's only a Zecher LaMikdash. And since it's only a Zecher LaMikdash, so therefore we should do it a little bit differently so people don't mistakenly think that actually I'm really counting the mitzvah to fulfill the mitzvah properly. So therefore we should count a little bit differently. It's nice to count, nice thing to do, but I'll do it a little bit differently. Okay? So the questions were, what was the minhag of Rabbanan Devei Rav Ashi? Rabbanan Devei Rav Ashi counted the days and the weeks, like the Torah said. What did Ameimar do? Ameimar, that's interesting. Ameimar counted the weeks and not the days, because he said it's only Zecher LaMikdash, and I need to show that it's a little bit different from a regular mitzvah. Please excuse the background noise. This recording was recorded at SAR Academy. Okay.
The Manny Kuplik, Lauren Cotton, sorry for you.
Manny Kuplik was there. So, let's talk about Tosfos. So Tosfos is asking an interesting question. Following question. Zecher LaMikdashu. Nira. The besafek chashecha yachol levarech. He says if it's not clearly yet dark outside, it's a doubt. It's called ben hashmasha. We're not sure if it's day or night. Like on Friday night, let's say when Shkia is at 7:15, but it gets really dark. Tzedek Chavim is at 8 o'clock. So it's 7:30. It's kind of dark, but it's not totally dark. So it's a suffix. He says if it's a suffix, you can make a bracha and you can count sfira. Ve'ein tzarich lamtin ad sheyehei vaday laila. You do not have to wait until it's totally light, like you do when? Like on Shabbat. Right? You don't do a malacha on Shabbat until it's totally dark. For Sfirat Homer, you don't have to be so strict. Why? Kevanchu Sveka Derabanan. Because since Sfirat Homer is only a mitzvah midirabanan, and why? Where did he get the fact that it's a mitzvah midirabanan? Because the Gemara calls it Zecher Lamikdash, right? So it's only a mitzvah midirabanan. So we have a principle called mitzvah derabanan lakula, and therefore we could be lenient. Now this is a very interesting thing. Wait a second. Do we paskin like a Meimar?
No.
We don't paskin like a Meimar. A Meimar who says just count the weeks because it's Eichel HaMikdash. We actually paskin like the other guy. So why does Tosfos say it's a Rabbanan? Maybe we actually think that counting sphere is mitzvah midoraita because it doesn't depend on the karbanot. So Tosfos clearly is of the opinion that no, that even the guys that disagree with Meimar, they agree that Sfirat HaOmer is only Zeichel HaMikdash. They disagree with the fact that because it's Zeichel HaMikdash, therefore you have to do it differently. They say, okay, it's Zeichel HaMikdash, but do it the right way. But they still say it's Zeichel HaMikdash. And therefore, Tosfot thinks, hold on one second, Tosfot thinks it's a Misah Midrabanan, and Tosfot thinks that therefore you can count when it's suffix, as opposed to the Rambam, who says, Mitzvah zo al kol ish Yisrael. B'chol makom u'b'chol zman. The Rambam says, don't make the mistake that Tosfos makes. Don't tell me that Sfirat HaOmer is a mitzvah that only applies at certain times or is different. It's not. The karbanot are not important. The Torah says, yes, after you bring the karban, that's when you start counting. But if you don't bring the karban, you still start counting. It's not dependent on the Beit HaMikdash. So there's a machloket between Tosfot and the Rambam as to whether Sfirat HaOmer today is the Oraita or the Rabbanan. That's the question. Okay? Okay, the Gemara continues. Let's do the next source. It's machloket Tosfot and Rambam about whether Sfirat HaOmer today is the Oraita or the Rabbanan. We now come to the famous halacha of the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot. And the Baal Halachot Gedolot, okay, we're now moving to the opinion of the Bahag in Tosfot. So, Od Pasak Halachot Gedolot, Shim Ifsik Yom Echad Velo Safar, Shuv Eino Sofer. That if a person, this is a famous halacha, that if a person forgot to count one day of Sfirat HaOmer, he is not able to continue counting. Mishum Tabai Tamimot, because you're required to have, Torah says Tamimot, Sheva Shabbatot Tamimot Tiyena, you should have consistent 7 weeks. Well, it's not consistent if you miss a day. So the Bahag says if you miss a day, you're done. Tosfot responds to this. This is less famous. He says, V'tema Gedolahu. He says, I have no idea what he's talking about. It's a wonder. V'lo yitachen. It doesn't make any sense. And Tosfot disagrees. Tosfot says, what are you talking about? If I forgot to put on tefillin yesterday, I shouldn't put on tefillin today. If I forgot to make a bracha yesterday, I shouldn't make a bracha today. So what if you forgot to count sfira yesterday? So that's too bad about yesterday, but why shouldn't you count today? And he disagrees with the Bahag. This is a machloket between, that's question 5. What's the machloket between Tosfot and the Bahag? Well, if a person forgets one day, Bahag says he's out, and Tosfot said he's not out. And I asked you your opinion as to which opinion or which shita you think makes more sense. That's an opinion question which you can think about yourselves. 2 more sources, and then we'll wrap it up. This is a long Mishnah. I'm not going to actually go through the whole Mishnah, but the Mishnah in Megillah basically says that there are 2 different types of mitzvot. There are some mitzvot that are day mitzvot, and there are some mitzvot that are night mitzvot. And the principle of the Mishnah is that any day mitzvah you can do all day, and any night mitzvah you can do all night. So for example, Kol HaYom kasher l'kriyat HaMegillah v'l'kriyat HaHalel v'l'tkiyat shofar. Right? These are mitzvot that you do during the day. Wake up per morning, you're supposed to read the Megillah. You didn't read it at 7 o'clock, you can read it at 10 o'clock, you can read it at 2 o'clock, you can read it at 5 o'clock. All day long. You should do it earlier because it's the principle of not pushing off mitzvot, etc. But technically you can do these mitzvot all day. And then the end of the Mishnah says that there are some night mitzvot. Kol halayla kasher l'ktzirat ha'omer. The cutting of the omer, which was done, can be done all night. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there was a specific time to cut the omer for the korban. That was something that was done at night. why is this relevant? So Tosfot, and it's hard to read and I apologize. Tosfot says, and I'll read you the words, Kol halayla kasher l'ktzirat ha'omer, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, she'im shachach levarech balayla, lo yivarech bayom. Tosfot says that Ksirat ha'omer is connected to Sfirat ha'omer. Similar to that opinion that about the Karbanot, right? That Sfirat ha'omer is dependent on the Karbanot. So he says, same thing with Sfirat ha'omer. It's a night mitzvah, like the Mishnah says. And therefore, if you forgot to count at night with a bracha, you shouldn't make a bracha during the day. Okay? Because it's a night mitzvah, not a day mitzvah. But, and I'm skipping a little bit. Later on, Tosfot goes to explain that the reason why it's a night mitzvah is because it says Tamimot. You don't have a full day if you start counting in the middle of the day. The day starts at night, so you should count at night. So you have the whole night, but if you didn't count at night, you already missed Tamimot. Okay? Now again, the Bahag. The Bahag loved this topic. So Bahag katav tahecha de inshi levarech balayla yimnel lemachar below bracha. The Bahag says if a person forgot to count at night, he should count the next day, but without a bracha. V'chein halacha, and that's the halacha. Aval im shachach layla vayom lo yimne od bivracha tebeinan tamima. But if you forgot the night and the day, this is the same Bahag that spoke in the last Tosfot. If you completely forgot the day and the night, then you can't count anymore with a bracha. This is the famous, again, another famous shita of the Bahag. So first of all, let's go through our answers. According to the Mishnah, what's the principle of davar shemitzvato balayla? The principle is that a night mitzvah can be done kol halayla. What's the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam? B'kesh l'misha shachach sfirat ha'omer balayla. He says you can't count during the day, or you can't make a bracha during the day. What is the Bahag? And this is really the important part right now. The Bahag says, well, it's a little bit of a compromise. He says, if you forgot to count at night, you should count during the day, but not with a bracha. But if you count during the day without the bracha, you can then count again the next night with a bracha. But if you forget totally to count the night and the day, then you can't even count the next night with a bracha at all. So the question is, what's this compromise? Right? In other words, you have to ask the question, wait a second. If Sfirat HaOmer can be done during the day, then you should make a bracha. And if Sfirat HaOmer can't be done during the day, then you shouldn't do it at all. And if you do it, it shouldn't help you count the next night. Why does that compromise say, well, don't do it with the bracha, but if you do it without the bracha, then the next night you can count again with the bracha. It's not like you forgot the day. So the question is, what's this compromise all about? And we talked about a principle called svek sveka, two svekot. When you have two svekot, the chances, it's almost like probability theory, right? And these are the two svekot. Safek number one is the first thing that we learned, the first Tosfot that we learned. The question is, if you forget one day of Sfira, are you out? Or can you continue counting? So that's a safek. Right? We saw machloka between the Bahag and Tosfot. It's not clear what the halacha is if you forget one night of Sfirat HaOmer. It's not clear. Why is it not clear? Well, on one hand, you could say the Torah says to count 49 days, so it's one long mitzvah, and therefore if you missed it, you missed it. On the other hand, you can say the Torah says to count 49 days, so every day you should count. And if you miss a day, then you should at least count the next day. One doesn't affect the other. Right? So there's a suffix. That's suffix number one. Suffix number two is whether you're allowed to count during the day. We didn't go into that suffix so much, but it was unclear. Is Sfirat HaOmer something that can be done during the day or not? That's also a suffix. We're not exactly sure. So therefore, the Bahag says, listen, he says, since it's a suffix, we basically don't allow you to count the next night with a bracha. Because maybe, right, if you forgot Sfirat HaOmer one day, maybe it's one long mitzvah, so you shouldn't count. So if you count, at least count without a bracha. Second suffix is about counting during the day. So we say, you know what, if you didn't count at night, count during the day without a bracha, because we don't want to make it. We don't want you to make a bracha levatala. We don't want you to make a wasted bracha, and therefore count during the day without a bracha. But if you put these two svekot together, then the chances are that you're in good shape. For example, if you forgot to count last night, okay, then you counted today without a bracha. So now what's your status tonight? So we say two svekot. Number one, maybe even if you forgot altogether, you could count the night with a bracha, because maybe it's 49 separate mitzvot, so you have no problem. On the other hand, even if we say it's one long mitzvah, but you counted today during the day, and maybe to count it during the day counts. And therefore, the theory of probability says that you are still in, and therefore you can count tonight with a bracha. That's the famous compromise of the Bahag, based on the principle of svek sveka. We are done.